Hi, it's the STEM Seekers where we interview our fellow STEMs and their jobs, and we talk about how you get into STEM from a high school's perspective. And today we have Dr. Faria from UniMel, where he's an engineering professor. He will be talking to us about everything that he does and what he normally does in a day.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Matt. I'll just loosely explain how I know Matt. So Matt and I fence together. Him and I both compete as a part of the Australian team, and we train together at Tuesday National Squad training. So I guess first question, Matt, who's better?
Okay.
Well, I mean,
Good
look, I
decision.
think you're going to have a much better career than me. You've started a lot earlier. You've got a lot of talent.
Uh,
You usually win in training. I don't know if you've beat me at a comp yet, but I have no doubt it will happen soon.
I think we fenced in one comp, one AFC in pools, correct?
Yeah, probably 3 or 4 years ago when you were much worse.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
but I think that's an interesting point that you still in your career, in the busyness of your career, you still have the time to travel overseas, fence competitions, do trainings. So I guess that can kind of lead us into our first question.
Yeah. So basically, how do you kind of balance all these things together? Maybe your social life, your job, and then just putting that all together. Like,
So I will say I don't think it's easy, especially with training and stuff. I think for things like exercise, you just kind of have to say it's part of your habit and you're going to do it and it's going to happen no matter what. But very frequently, most weeks it's like from work to training or from training to work, and then kind of not having sort of transition time. So I think that's like not having little gaps in between your schedule
yeah,
is probably a pretty good way. But it is definitely a challenge, right? Sometimes you hear, balancing a rich social life, like exercise, enough sleep, and a career is like you can pick not all of them. Probably the thing that I skip out on the most is sleep, and then sleep a lot more
yeah,
on the weekends. But that is, I mean, but it is at the end of the day kind of a choice that I'm making, right? Because I think that, I really love the fencing and I love the exercise aspects, and I think it makes you a lot healthier and a lot happier. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think like everyone, we all struggle to balance all the things that we want, and I think it's
yeah,
it's naturally pretty human to want to do more than we actually can. And yeah, the main piece of advice I have for working in sort of healthy things is that you make it part of your routine and your habit, and you don't compromise on that. That's pretty much the only way to do it.
Yeah. But I mean, also, it's because you are in a very like high position within your career and within your profession that that you have the
mm,
ability to travel overseas and take time off to dedicate towards fencing. So if you don't
Well,
mind,
yeah,
sorry?
I mean, I can tell. Yeah,
Yeah.
sort of. Only during parts of the year,
Yeah.
right? Like it's very hard to do that. If you're teaching, you essentially can't take time off during that time.
Yeah.
But most jobs have some degree of flexibility about taking leave and stuff. And if you have a job that has no flexibility and leave at all, I would argue it's probably not worth it because
Mm.
your job is only one aspect of your life.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I'm happy to talk
Yeah.
about the role that I have.
Yeah. I was yeah, I
Yeah,
think could we get like a good understanding of like your entire your what you currently do, what's your current position,
yep,
and I guess the entire journey of how you got there,
sure,
starting probably all the way back into maybe high school or college.
sure. So I mean, I can start with high school and kind of do a chronological. I went to a public high school. So in the States we have these. I don't know if you have them. I think you have them in Australia as well. They're kind of like you test to go into them,
Oh, magnet
but they're not,
schools?
you don't have to pay. Yeah, it's called a magnet
Yeah,
school.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what we call it
that's
here.
the
okay,
So
equivalent
selective,
of our like Melbourne High, our Macrob,
yeah,
our
selective
Corey
schools.
selective schools. Yeah.
yeah. So I went to a magnet school for most of my high school, which I was very lucky to be able to do, and kind of set me up for a lot of future happiness. It was very academically focused. There was a lot of like they had like a whole period of sort of extracurricular activity at the end of the day, and they had these like kind of research like labs that they had that you got
Oh,
to do in your junior or senior year, which was really cool. So yeah, that's why I wanted to go there, and it was a very very great environment. yeah, much better than
That's
the,
cool.
the non magnet high school that I went to for the first year. And so that was called Thomas Jefferson High School. It's in Virginia. I then went to university at Carnegie Mellon University, and I went into computer science. And really, it's kind of crazy that you make these decisions when you're, 16, 17, or maybe even younger. And why did I decide computer science? Well, I liked computers, and the computer courses that I had taken were something that I had fun in. I liked programming. Computer science is actually a little bit more specialized than programming. It's more about how to solve tricky problems, and it's a little bit more of a branch of mathematics than it is just sort of learning how to program. But there is kind of a lot of overlap with engineering in it, and there was a fair amount of there's of course a fair amount of programming in the curriculum. And so yeah, went to Carnegie Mellon, then graduated from there 4 years later. Our degrees are 4 years rather than 3 or 5, which is more common in Australia. Now, in the States, you take on quite a bit of debt to go to college, quite a bit more than here, and under much worse terms than you do here. And so right out of college, I was like, this is the biggest number I've ever seen on a piece of paper, and it's the money I owe, not money I'm getting. So I really wanted to get a job that paid well to pay that off. And I ended up so I took a software engineering job and with a company called Vistaprint. And that was, so again, my degree was in computer science. Software engineering is more of an engineering discipline than computer science. Computer science is a little bit more academic. It's more math based. During university, I had done some research into robotics and some other areas. And I liked research, but I didn't feel super passionate about any particular area, but I always wanted to do research. Anyway, so I worked for this software engineering company for 4 or 5 years. During that time, they asked me to transfer to Barcelona and then to Spain to help grow their teams a little bit. So I did that, which was amazing. And both of those times, it was about the time I was thinking of quitting the company. And then I was like, well, it's an opportunity to live in another country at a pretty good wage. It could pay off all my university debt, which was fantastic. And yeah, so it was great. So I stayed on longer than I sort of intended to, but I always had in my head like, oh, I kind of want to do research. And then once I had transferred to Sydney and was working in Sydney, I was like, well, if I don't do research like now, I'm never really going to do it. And I started emailing professors whose work I thought was cool, and really with, again, not a huge level of experience or knowledge in any particular area. I knew I wanted to do something a bit biological. So I emailed a few, I emailed, maybe 5 to 10 people around the world, read a little bit about their research, didn't have a great deal of understanding. Like I didn't have access to scientific papers, and I didn't have that kind of scientific training, but enough to sort of read about what they were doing and think it was interesting and kind of say, oh, would computer programming be interesting? Like I can do some simulations, these kinds of things. Eventually connected with someone in Melbourne who became one of my PhD advisors, and started PhD with him. His name was Frank Caruso. He's a very well-known material scientist who specialized in making nanoparticles in Australia. And he also connected me to my second PhD advisor, because usually you have 2 here, or at Melbourne anyway. And my second PhD advisor was named Edmund Crampton, and he worked on what's called systems biology, which is about modeling biology as a system. That's not a very good definition, but it's sort of the complexity of having lots of complicated interacting things and what you need to do to kind of account for that. And there's a number of different sort of strategies for doing that. And so my work was kind of combining the modeling of biology with nanoparticles, and that's the area I've continued to work in and developed some expertise there. And so one of the things that we've done is kind of push forward the idea and methods to quantify how nanoparticles work before you're doing like animal or human trials. So quantifying how they work with cells and early stage evaluation. And so did my PhD, then did a postdoc. I did my PhD and have been at Melbourne Uni ever since. I did a postdoc, and now I'm like a faculty there. So my title is a senior lecturer. So in the academic system, it goes from A to E. E is like a full professor. That's the latest stage of your career. Then D is an associate professor. C is a senior lecturer. B, A. When you graduate from like your earliest jobs after a PhD would be level A. The PhD and anything before it is like pre A, I think. Actually, maybe there's like a really low level of A or something. There's like numbers within each one of them. So I think there's like very specific guides about what somebody has to be hired at depending on their level. Anyway, but that's kind of where I am in in career. And yeah, now I'm a senior lecturer, which is a mixture of teaching. So pretty much I think maybe all faculty, but pretty much all faculty are either fully research because they have a grant that pays their salary. And that usually means that they have an 80% research load and a 20% what's called service and leadership. But most people are on 40-40-20, which means 40% of their time is meant to be teaching and learning, 40% of their time is research, and 20% of their time is service and leadership, which is kind of the least well-defined flaws. But I can go into more of that, or answer questions about that as you like.
So now that you're a senior lecturer, I'm sure a lot of the high schoolers will want to know, what does a typical day kind of look like from like kind of 9 to 5 or whatever, like probably 8 to 5 as a senior lecturer rather. And like, what does a day kind of look like?
Yeah, well, I'm more of an evening person, so mine tend to be more like 9 to 6 or 10 to 7. Thankfully, you have a little bit of flexibility in how you in the hours you work in academia. I would say that is one of the better perks. So it is extremely variable. It's probably more variable than almost any job. So in the teaching part, all right, you have things like preparing lectures, which can be everything from reading and learning about a subject yourself or learning about an area. Sometimes that's because you need to know it better before you teach it. Sometimes it's because you know it, but you don't know how to explain it, or you can't think of good ways or good examples. And so you're looking at other people's material, or you're reading things, you're thinking, sometimes you're watching YouTube videos, trying to find good ways of explaining a complicated or a thorny topic. So there's the sort of working out what you're going to say, then actually preparing slides and preparing material to teach. Then, of course, there is the actual teaching, right? Which is much smaller than the amount of time you spend prepping for it. So you go up and you give a sort of a performance. You're talking. I always think of it as a little bit of a performance, because you want to make the people that actually do come to class, which seems to be smaller and smaller every year, have a enjoyable and an engaged time. There is a lot of research looking at sort of learning it. We don't really understand why, but it certainly seems that people who come to class learn material better. It's weird, but it is something that we keep that does look pretty reliable. So there's that. There's the other aspects of, so that's kind of like the best part of teaching, and then there is the like much less fun part of teaching, which is like making assignments and marking. And yeah, that's well, at least that's what I think. I really don't like doing that. Sometimes you can come up with cool ideas for a project or an assignment. I like that part. Like when you think of a good idea, it's great. Thinking of how to test concepts and things in a good way, and then coming up with a rubric, and then sort of communicating that rubric is really I find that stressful or difficult. Not much less fun than the other aspects of teaching. And then also there's I'm sure that exams are really stressful for you guys right now, but it is so much more stressful to write an exam than to do one, because like if you make a mistake on exam, right, you lose some points for one person, right? But if I make a mistake on an exam, I screw up like 100 people's day, or 60 or however many the classes. So that's the kind of teaching part. And then there's also usually tutors involved, and so you'll there's some amount of prep for their the stuff that they teach and for like helping them develop concepts. And then there's like people coming to office hours even happens. Again, I think this is an incredibly valuable thing to do when you're going to university. It's like if you aren't doing well in a subject or don't get it, like go to the office hours that your lecturer has. It's like so valuable, like because you're basically getting one-on-one tutoring from like an expert in an area who's like just there for you. And it's very underutilized, which means like you can learn so much and then you can really get back on top of something. And like it's never like if you have it's very, very rare that you would get a professor that's like going to be a dick about it, right? Like I know sometimes people are afraid of like going and seeing like they don't know anything. That's like I'm not saying that it's not gonna, like, of course there's many types of people and there's people that are assholes, so like it could happen, but I think it's very, very unlikely that your professor or lecturer is going to like be mean to you about it, or like not help or not be really engaged with helping you learn, even if you're like way behind. Like there's no, like it's very, very unlikely that would happen. Again, I'm not gonna say it's zero, but it's very unlikely. And you'd probably know, because they'd probably be an asshole in class, right? You'd see that. So that's the teaching. And then the research also extremely varied. So there's kind of a lot of different things that you have to do. So from the sort of least interesting, there's applying for grants. So applying for grants is like you write up the ideas that you want to do, and you submit them to usually government, but sometimes there's philanthropic schemes, other schemes like this. But you're convincing someone to give you money to pursue project or research that you think is useful or that you think is valuable and gonna make a difference. And like there's the writing of grants, and some of that's like organizing other people, because most grants, it's not just one person, it's a group of people working together. And so you kind of have to talk with them. There's collaboration with other people. The actual writing a grant has there's one part that's like where you actually describe what the project is. That's cool and fun to develop, and I like doing that part. There's also a part where you convince, where you have to write out how great you and your team are, and how you're the absolute perfect best people to do this thing, and how you're exceptional. And that part sucks. I hate that part. It's because kind of always the same. And you're talking about how wonderful you are, and I just find it's very that's the not fun part of grants to write. That's what the research agencies call it as well, self-glaze. So anyway, that's part of how it works. Yeah. So then there's writing papers, right? So that's when the research is over, you're writing up, or when a project is over. They're never really over, but at various stopping points, you write up and communicate to the rest of the community what you've done, why it's interesting, what it's done, and then you send it to papers and send it to journals rather, and convince them to publish it. And that is, again, both of those processes have a bit of failure rate built in. So you'll submit something, you write something up, you submit it to a journal, and then sometimes the journal will say, "Oh, we're not interested in this." Sometimes they send it out to reviewers, and the reviewers send it back. Pretty much, we always think whatever the reviewer said was crazy. I mean, that's not true. Sometimes they have very, very good comments, but it doesn't take very many. It doesn't take very many bad comments for you to think that the person who's read your paper really is a moron. That's a natural human thing. I think people read responses and they're like, "Oh, what is this person thinking?" So there's a little bit of that, but ultimately that process makes the paper better, and peer review means that there's some guardrails to publishing stuff that makes it more believable and more understandable. So yeah, that's the writing and parts. You also do some reviewing, and also part of writing papers is you might be editing a paper that somebody else wrote. Yeah, students. So PhD students will write, or you might help them write, or you might have collaborators, right, that wrote a paper, or you rewrote part of it, and then you go and you edit and you review papers and kind of make them better. Personally, my favorite part is the editing. I like editing. I like figuring out a way to make something better once it's on the page. The first draft for me is always kind of the hardest part. Making figures is fun as well, figuring out how to make a graph look nice and communicate everything you want. No, this is really, I think it's worth knowing what you like about a job, right? And that's why I'm kind of trying to label the parts that I like and I don't, because I don't think it's something that people talk about enough.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice to doing lots of different things and figuring out the part that really resonates with you and that you enjoy. I think it's worth doing, because it's not like you a lot of times, a lot of motivational stuff, it will pretend that everybody knows exactly what they want to do, and the problem is just going and doing it. But actually knowing what you want to do, or knowing what you like, or knowing what you're good at is actually not super easy of a process to work out. And so I think taking some time to do that is worth doing.
And I think hopefully this kind of channel exposes people to make that process easier. Yeah. So
that's the writing and reading parts. Then there's the actual research, right? Which is the coolest part, the part that I think most people are here for. And so for me, that research is a mixture of biological work, making computational models, and a little bit of writing. Well, recently, at least, I've been trying to make stuff that's trying to make automation to do the experiments as well. And so I can talk about specifically my research, which is looking at cells and particles interacting. And so what you do there is somebody has to synthesize the particles. You put the particles in with cells. You see how the cells respond in various ways, and there's different techniques to measure that. And then there's the development of mathematical models that represent how these things are doing. And that's a kind of long process of writing code, talking to people, thinking about it, reading about how the cells work or how the particular organ that you're interested in works and understanding it. But that's kind of more specific to my research and maybe not exactly what you guys are interested in. But I can go into more detail there, or we can talk about other stuff. I feel like I've talked about a lot of stuff. So
it still sounds pretty interesting, but yeah, that's true. Our people on that channel might not.
I think you had something to say about the collaboration,
Oh,
right?
yeah. So we know that you're a professor, right? Is there a lot of collaboration between the other professors at your school, or is it more individually research-based, doing your own thing in the lab?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a senior lecturer is the title. I think you can call me professor when I'm teaching, but like the actual title is senior lecturer. But the responsibilities are quite similar. That's the responsibilities are teaching and research, which is, I guess, the responsibilities of a professor in an academic institution. But so in answer to your question, like there is definitely collaboration between different people. I think it's something that departments and universities want to happen more, right? Because that tends to lead to better and more interesting work. But typically labs are led by a person, and then that person will kind of drive their particular research area forward. I'll give you an example, right? So I'm interested in this automation stuff because I want to get more data faster so we can understand how these, so we can develop better models to understand how particles and cells are going to interact, which means we can predict and make better therapies in the future. So as part of my interest in this automation, I have a robot that can do various aspects of experiments, which is pretty cool. It's like a big benchtop thing that does. It's called a liquid handling robot. So
you have a Jarvis.
I wish. I wish it was like a robot arm. That would be much cooler. I mean, the thing about robot arms, I should say, is like robot arms are actually really hard to use because they have so much flexibility in what they can do. Right. And so they can also be quite dangerous because like if a robot arm like swings around and hits you in the face, you're going to have a bad day. And so the actual tracking is called the kinematics. Figuring out exactly how a robot arm will go like where you want is like quite complicated because it has a lot of different joints. Whereas something like a 3D printer, which is like on rails, right? So it can go up and this way and like it can move in 3 dimensions, is easier, right? It tends to be easier for specialized things. And so for a lot of robotics, it's easier to have a very fixed platform kind of thing rather than a robot arm. Even though a robot arm is more flexible, the fact that it's so much harder to program and customize and make safe for the thing that you want makes it less commonly used. And so this robot is like a big boxy thing that has rails and moves a pipette tip. I mean, it's still very cool. Like there is something cooler about robot arms, objectively, but it is like on fixed rails because it's much easier to work with. So anyway, I'm interested in this automation. I have this robot trying to figure out how it works. And there's another group at the university who is doing a totally different type of research. They're developing a 3D printer for types of tissues and organs. And we have some interest there because like we want, I would like them to have that printer. I'm not really interested in developing that printer, but I would like them to have that printer so that they can make better representations of organs and tissues that we can then test therapies against, of particles and nanoparticles and other types of sort of next generation therapies. And so, but they want to develop this 3D printer. Part of developing that 3D printer is making different types of material for the cell for the cells to grow in. And so they are interested in kind of like trying a lot of different combinations of particular types of materials for their 3D printer. I have this robot, so we were like talking about how we can design experiments so that they can get the robot to try 100 or 1,000 different variations on a particular material so that they can then test what's working well and figure out a kind of relationship between the ingredients and like the overall properties of the material. And so and so now we're working together on that. That's like a small thing. It's not like a big research grant or anything, but it's like, oh, we both have this capability, both have this interest. Let's figure out a way to work together on that. And so that happens a fair amount.
Yeah.
These kind of smaller scale things, but there often are areas of research specialty that people are interested in, right? So there, for instance, at Melbourne Uni, there's a lot of people that do medical imaging. In my department, I should say. There's a number of people that do medical imaging, and so they'll often work together on particular things to share access to an MRI machine, or they develop new techniques for seeing things in an MRI that are harder to see or can't be seen without the processing that they've developed. I don't work in medical imaging, so I don't know, but there's often sort of topic areas that a few people will be working on with different specialties in that in that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
So
think
it's usually driven by one. So like research, it's kind of per group, there'll be somebody with autonomy that's kind of driving a particular direction. And then when there's opportunities to collaborate or options to collaborate, people will.
Yeah,
that's a good answer.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time. So I think
Okay,
we'll quickly
sorry.
do. No, it's all good. No, it's been a lot of good information that I think our viewers will value.
Yeah.
But I think we'll quickly do a rapid fire and just get some questions, some important questions out of the way. So I think first of all, what are some misconceptions with your job, whether that be engineering or in academia?
Well, I think there's some misconception of academics as being like not attached to the real world and just kind of like thinking about things in a separate like ivory tower. Sometimes people say, and like most of the engineers, biomedical engineers that I know, are like super committed to like trying to make things better in the real world. And like sometimes that isn't super connected to industry, right? But part of that is that industry has different incentives than research, right? So for instance, like industry isn't interested in developing things that aren't profitable, but that's not the same as like progressing the world or making the world a better place. So I would say one misconception is that like just because it's not connected to industry or just because it's not connected to, it doesn't mean that the person's not like very committed to trying to improve the world or make things better. Now, of course, there's academics that are doing all kinds of wild things, thinking about weird mathematical constructs, but but that doesn't. But the other thing is that it's really hard to know sometimes what will make a big difference, right? So, for instance, a great example is the GLP-1 inhibitors, like one of the super famous drug right now. They're the ones that make people lose weight. They treat diabetes. Maybe they treat other things like addiction. They were, as I recall, from somebody studying like a particular venom in a lizard, in a Gila lizard. And that's where they came from, right? So, and like nobody would have predicted that. Yeah. So, we kind of need this curiosity-based research. I see it as all kind of like a big kind of interacting ecosystem. And you can't just say, oh, we're only going to do the things that work, or the only thing we're going to do the things that are predictive, because you can't predict what those things are. So you need this kind of curiosity-driven research. And like I said, most of the engineers, the biomedical engineers that I know, really want to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Talking about new stuff, next question is, how is AI going to change kind of your landscape in academia, in teaching, etc.?
Yeah, so it is early days to tell. I'm very worried about it because I think a lot of people are trying to use it rather than like trying to think about things. And I think that will have a pretty corrosive effect on everybody's mind. And when I say people, I mean students, right? I think students, I think there's an enormous temptation to just get AI to do things for you. And right now, AI does things like it does most things okay, right? It can write an okay essay, or usually a pretty terrible essay, but occasionally it can write a good paragraph, right? It can write an okay paragraph. I don't believe the narrative that it's going to be this like completely like that it's just going to keep getting better and better. I think that there is a limit. I think we're starting to see those limits now. I think you see that the improvement is dropping off enormously over time. So, on the one hand, perhaps we'll get to a post-scarcity society where we have AIs doing all kinds of little things. I think another positive thing is that it's revealing a lot of bullshit work that nobody wants to do. And getting rid of that, writing emails or reading emails that are, that are kind of that sort of thing. But it's also generating a tremendous amount of slop that is not helping anyone. And I think that an important thing to remember for your sort of intellectual development is that part of going and doing your coursework is like training your brain in how to think and solve problems, even if the problems are already solved, right? So, much like, I mean, additions are maybe too similar. Like it's nice to be able to add numbers, right? Even though computers can add numbers for us, like in your local life, being able to add like 1 + 4 is actually still kind of important because it makes your life much more convenient, right? So that's a simple example, right? It's super dumb, right? Yeah. A calculator can solve addition perfectly well, right? And yet being able to add small numbers is still useful. And the only way you get that is by practicing it when you were, 8 or whenever you learn. It's probably earlier than that, but whenever you learn how to add, like that's the only way you get it. And there's also a lot more complicated things like writing an essay or thinking about something or developing your ideas that like you won't get if you just have an AI do it, and you won't ever like develop as a person, and it will really limit you, is what I think. And that's what I'm worried about, like just a massive number of people like not getting that kind of like training to make their minds like more complex and more able to do higher level stuff because they won't put in the effort to do the lower levels.
I think the dystopia that is like we're trying to avoid is like the situation in like Wall-E, but like the intellectual equivalent of that, where everyone's just like reclining on chairs and floating around everywhere. I think that would be really, really grim. I think final question, before we run out of time, is what's your advice to high schoolers who are interested in engineering, and what kind of passions they have to start to develop now before they go into university?
I think learn to do and make things, regardless of what those things are. And doesn't even have to be in engineering. I think that's much more valuable and useful than the sort of other stuff. Like learning to do project management or the sort of soft skill stuff is fine, but like the actual thing is doing the thing, right? So build a circuit or or write a program or make some music or actually create something. I think is the much more. I think you learn so much in doing that, and all the stuff around that like comes with making the thing. So that's my advice. Is like first of all, I think that's a much more useful skill. That's the thing that like people are. That's what it's much more employable if that's what you care about. But it's also like better for your own like soul. You know what I mean? It's like you know don't be streaming and I mean like whatever, if you want to stream then stream, but don't like have some activities that are like making a thing, right? And even for something like creating video or audio content, it's like actually do the mixing and do the actually creating it yourself, I think is important. Like this is a type of making the thing, right? You're actually making like some overall thing that you're interested in.